All right. So welcome everyone. We are now, I instantly froze. We are now live for our CoinMarketCap Holiday Fireside Chat series. I am Molly Jane, CoinMarketCap's head of content. I could hear my voice in the background. And today we're going to be joined by a series of guests covering several panels. We're going to start off the show with an intro or an overview rather of DeFi, all of the trends and developments that have happened over the past year, all the positive trends that have happened over the past year, should I say. We're all about rebuilding in this bear market. Then in about 30 minutes, we're going to change the subject over to cryptocurrency journalism in the age of Elon Musk's Twitter. And joining us then are going to be Joon, who's a crypto journalist, Pete Rizzo, who is an editor at Bitcoin Magazine, Tiffany Wong, who, as you probably know, got those very interesting phone call recordings with Sam Bankman-Fried a few weeks ago before he went to jail for a while. Next, we're going to then have a small panel with myself, with Maya, and with Teana Baker-Taylor, where we're going to be talking about what the EU stands to gain from America's crypto policy fumble. Or was it a fumble? Well, you're going to sort of get at those questions in that. And then we're going to end with a little bit about open metaverses and why they matter with Punk6529, who is a very well-known NFT collector. So until then, I'm going to introduce our first guests very soon. We have Alice and we have Oliver. So let me just get them in. Make sure their video is turned on and live. For everyone watching, if you guys have any questions you want us to ask our guests, please throw them into either the chat on the YouTube live stream. You can try to message us on Twitter. Anyway, Alice, why don't you say hello?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Molly. Hi, my name is Alice. I work on the research side of things at CoinMarketCap. And today with me at the first part of the panel, we have founder of Panther Protocol, co-founder of Beat, and musical creative artist, Oliver Gale. Ollie. Hi, Ollie. How are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm good, thank you.
I'm going to disappear now and let you guys talk. So good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, Oliver, thanks very much for joining us. I hope you are having a great week.
I am, yep, in Barbados, which is my home, and it's becoming quite festive here, so it's a good place.
Very nice, very good. And we're pushing towards the end of the week as well. I hope everyone has something nice planned for the weekend also. Today, thank you very much for joining us. We have a very busy schedule. I think a lot of key topics, key things we want to touch upon. You yourself, of course, you have various different backgrounds as well. I know there's Oliver Gale side of you, that's the business side of you. There's Ollie, the creative side of you as well. Why don't we start from the general markets? So 2022, what a crazy year, right? We had 3C, we had Luna, Celsius, Voyager, FTX. What's the craziest event for you in 2022?
I think FTX took the cake. I actually saw the Terra Luna UST collapse happening at some point because of the nature of crypto macro cycles, the boom and bust cycles, and also the nature of the collateral that was back in USD. So I have an asset management firm called Base 2, and we built indicators and liquidated our USD and anchor positions about a week in advance of the Terra Luna collapse. So I wouldn't say that was unforeseen. Certainly, FTX, however, and a $10 billion holding customer deposits from, an organization and a founder that has done so much political lobbying and sort of reputation, what is now clear as reputation washing, it really wasn't something that I saw coming. So I'd say FTX takes the cake.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think just for the magnitude of things and how crazy the events unfold, just the more we get into it, the more details we dig out, the more we know. I guess that's definitely one of the top craziest things happen for most of the people in the industry as well. So FTX. Another thing interesting, because people say that if there is a silver lining for the FTX FTX fiasco, it is probably a reminder of the importance of decentralization, right? So do you think it's true that we'll see a big switch to DeFi next year? Do you see that trend coming?
I'd say yes and no. So yes, I do think it's a great reminder. L1, L2s are becoming more efficient, which allows you to have more and more DeFi or sort of currently CeFi operations take place on chain. And so as we get greater efficiency with DeFi smart contract execution, you will see more and more of finance migrate on chain. However, next year is a pretty short time horizon for that. The industry has major compliance and AML considerations, huge regulatory enactment crackdown happening from UAE to the United States and everywhere in between. This is a major agenda. And so there has to be this introduction of digital identity standards and on-chain compliance. And I think that that's going to take more than a year to reach a level of maturity where you'll see a greater volume of transactions happening on-chain, on sort of exchange volume. I don't see it happening next year, put it that way.
Yeah, and also I think when it comes to this, there are the product side of the things, how to make DeFi products more user-friendly, or some of the key issues that we can discuss a bit later. There's also the regulation side, which you very nicely summarized there as well. Because I know Panther protocol is very much focused on, the privacy side of things. So within the DeFi space, right, you touched upon some of the key challenges. When I was doing my research, I think it's interesting to say privacy being a very hot topic. So maybe if you could help the users understand why privacy matters, and maybe can use some examples?
Yeah, totally. So first of all, privacy is a cornerstone of some of our most fundamental rights. So the right freedom to speech and expression also includes the right to encrypt your communication and communicate with another party privately, or to not share information. Maybe it's not even a communication. So, silence says a lot sometimes. So at the core of our rights as sovereign human beings comes this right to have privacy, whether it's privacy in your own home or privacy in your online transactions or interactions with what we're now calling Web3 and Web2. And so, the impact that lack of privacy has an impact even on things like democracy and voting. If your votes aren't private, then you're subject to coercion, collusion, and compromise of the integrity of the process of democracy. So in some sense, you even have a tie-in between democracy and privacy. Now, what Panther's addressing is on-chain transactional privacy and DeFi interactions taking place privacy. And on both sides of the spectrum, on one side, you have the retail end user who, in a world where you're using blockchain, stablecoins, or even CBDCs to transact at the pharmacist, that's confidential information. What you do in your healthcare, what you do with your cash, these things, as long as you're a law-abiding citizen, you have a right and should have a right to privacy. So there's this one side of the spectrum. And the other side of the spectrum is if you're an enterprise or even a government, and you're offering financial services on behalf of yourself or your client. If you're an asset manager, your portfolio construction should be private. If you're making transactions on behalf of large clients, OTC, your trades should be private. And so Panther's building the tools to enable this on-chain DeFi privacy, but also using zero-knowledge proofs to enable the compliance disclosures that come with that. And so the correct way to think about Panther is it's a multi-chain privacy middleware for dark pools and for DeFi interaction.
Yeah, I think alpha preservation as a use case for DeFi showcase how privacy matters. Some other things like, on an AFT side, the leaderboard, tracking the wheels, and now it almost become like an identity card in a sense. That I think would be a practical use for where privacy will help in this case as well. We got a question in from the YouTube channels actually. So do you think the bull market is near, or will the So will the bear market continue into 2023?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my view is that we have a few factors which are pulling on the economy. One, obviously, is the Fed continuing to hike rates and to pull capital out of the market. So I would expect that Q2, Q3, we'll see that the Fed begin to reverse policy and rates will level off. Maybe they'll start to come down. I think that's a catalyst, but it's not the only one. We have the war in Ukraine, an energy crisis, which is creating a drag on the economy and creating a risk-off environment. And then I think as well, you still have some supply chain issues and what we're now calling deglobalization, which is impacting global supply chains across the board. So these factors are, creating pressure on the economy, and crypto DeFi is not immune to that. And really, even if you look at something like Bitcoin as a non-correlated asset, with so much investment from institutions and funds and family offices and asset managers, risk off is a macro decision that you make for your portfolio. So whether you've got 5.1% of crypto in your portfolio, risk off means trim that position and go to the sidelines. Now, look, on the balance of things, I think it's probably 60-40 for us to see the sort of recessionary environment come to an end and the market to begin to slowly recover. But I don't expect any dramatic price movement in 2023 in the crypto sector as a whole. I think it's going to be a lot of sideways, and hopefully we start to see some recovery.
Yeah, I liked how you put this into the global economic angle here, because very much I think crypto in itself is still a risk-on asset. So that's a very good point. Actually, we have some, I want to ask about regulations, because you said you are based in Barbados, which I'm not jealous at all. It looks very nice, by the way, your background and everything. So I wanted to ask about regulations in the Caribbean. So first of all, maybe we can talk about Barbados, right? So what are the key regulatory development in Barbados this year? And also any key milestones you're seeing in the Caribbean?
Well, Barbados hasn't had any developments in terms of regulation and progress. There has been some increased interest from the government of Barbados in enabling a legislative environment that's precise. I think that's what the industry is missing today, is clarity on what the regulation should be, what compliant and non-compliant means. So the Barbadian government has expressed interest and has begun to bring industry stakeholders. They had a conference earlier this year that the government was involved with. And so there's interest. And I would hope to see that turn into some legislative framework that really opens the doors for Web3 builders to continue to onshore in Barbados. We do have a small cohort of companies in Barbados, a lot of Canadian offshore businesses. Barbados has one of the best double taxation agreements on a global basis. So I think it's the 10th strongest passport for that reason. So Barbados is great infrastructure, but it's not quite ready, in my opinion. In terms of the Caribbean, we've seen the Cayman come out with VASP guidelines. And we've also seen BVI is about to pass some guidelines around virtual asset service providers. That's what a VASP is. And all of this is the downstream impact of FATF guidelines, which have been coming out for a number of years, but are now making clear, in their view, that DeFi and DeFi operators need to have licenses. And so I've seen this trend in looking for jurisdictions for Panther as an ecosystem. We have various entities, the foundation, the development company. We're now exploring setting up a self-regulating entity to launch the shielded pool and run it. And so we've done a lot of digging on different jurisdictions, and the trend is very much legislation is either being enacted or drafted to put in place these virtual asset service provider licenses. Now, doesn't mean I necessarily agree with the stance, but that's the environment.
Right, that makes sense. And also a point to add to that is you do see in the whole world, there are different markets different regions with different levels of regulation friendliness to crypto put in place. And the direction they are going is quite interesting as well, in terms of some countries are definitely taking on a more pro-crypto, crypto-friendly type of direction, whereas the others are sort of retrieving or even waiting and see what's going to happen. So I think regulation, again, back to what we were discussing at the beginning, for example, the FTX and the solution move on to DeFi. Product is only one set of things, right? The solutions that we create in the industry, the things that we build is one side of things. The other is regulation. We do have a question coming in, quite specific one. It's about, so let's go through this together because we might need some background here. What are your thoughts on Senator Warren's proposed bill that screams anti-privacy? Do you see crypto becoming a single voter issue? So I believe this just came in today, the news. I don't know if you've had time to catch up on it.
I'm not familiar with it, but the principles I can probably comment on. And so, look, my views are very hardline, which are that there is no scope in our society whatsoever for individuals not to have the sovereign right to privacy. So your right to privacy should be a fundamental, inviolable right. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, there's money laundering considerations, criminal, child pornographic, etc., other considerations. Now, these are illicit/criminal activities, and it is entirely within the bounds of a healthy society to have law enforcement or investigators or whatever action it is that needs to be taken by the enforcement bodies to ensure that law and order and peace are maintained. However, you cannot use the 0.0001% of actors in a lawful society and then apply a law or a rule or a system that completely undermines the freedom, sovereignty, and integrity of society for the other 99.999%. So what we do at Panther is we say, restore the starting point. The starting point is I have a right to privacy. I'm going to transact privately. And the other side of the coin is compliance is an important function. And we're enabling the tools to allow regulators to, under the right circumstances, access the reports of licensed entities. And so let me get specific about how Panther is deploying and operating. The shielded pool is broken into zones, and each zone has a license which is granted to an operator. That operator is offering some financial service somewhere in the world. There may be regulation, there may be no regulation. Panther protocol is indifferent to whether or not you have regulation standards in your jurisdiction. The protocol enables the operator to take the liability for the transactions that take place within the shielded pool. DeFi interactions, cross-chain bridges, atomic swaps, private transactions. That operator is the party that has to determine for themselves whether they need the transaction data of their users, whether they need a license, whether they need an AML program. And if they violate their laws in their jurisdiction, then they will be liable for that. And so this is the way that enforcement happens. But the idea of nobody should have privacy, we should have a backdoor in everything, privacy is not congruent with the digital economy, is extreme and Orwellian, and will dramatically undermine the lives of any man or woman that proposes that today is shooting their own children in the foot. To be graphic. To be graphic.
I was going to say that's a very graphic message.
It's one thing to sit in office. It's one thing to sit in your office and propose theoretical legislation that you would like to see passed. It's another thing to put yourself in the shoes of your own future generations and imagine the impact that your actions will have on them. And I'm sure it would lead to a different outcome for anyone who is essentially advocating for surveillance economies.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point in terms of making regulation practical, not just what the invasion list should be like. Yeah, that's a very strong message as well. I want to switch things up a little bit because I know there's a creative side of you, Ollie, as well. I want to ask about NFT because that's also a topic we planned for today's entire CMC event. So how did you first get into NFT?
How did I first? So a very good friend of mine who goes by the name of Soft Money. He used to work together with me at bit.com. He's a Barbadian actually, and I think it was in late 2021 introduced me to. I mean, I was aware of NFTs, but I was skeptical. But he really said, take a look at the Solana ecosystem, and Soft Money has become a pretty popular influencer in the Solana and their ecosystem. And so he brought me in and showed me the ropes of, hey, look, this is how NFT investing works, and here are the collectors, and here's the way you want to operate as an art collector. And actually, I've now transitioned my passion for collectibles, and I've been collecting physical art from Caribbean artists. And so, for me, it's great. I'm as a character, I also write and perform music, and that's another side to myself. So art and creativity and creation, whether it's entrepreneurial, fine art, NFTs, music, it's all from the same source, really.
Very good. Yeah, I think that in a sense, it's very good how people normally do this, right? They come into via one point and then expand their build upon how they first came into the space. I think definitely very looking forward to the different projects and things you're working on at the moment. Also, maybe just quickly on the market trend, because we wanted to maybe just get your view on key things that's in the market. Let's start with DeFi first, going to 2023. And then market in general, I think if you could pick 3 key crypto theses or convictions for next year, what would be the 3?
So next year, digital identities and social graphing becomes an in production and growing niche and service type in DeFi that'll be connected to hardened DeFi ecosystems. I think next year we're going to see a major shift in the regulatory landscape. One of the questions was, is real yield here to stay? I think next year we see a large swath of tokens that are called governance tokens and utility tokens today designated by the SEC as securities, and massive delistings of those projects. And in that gap, we'll start to see a security token, real yield will continue within that sphere. And next year, I also expect to see a number of zero knowledge protocols, ZK VMs, Panther protocol. I think the zero knowledge narrative is going to take off in more than one sense. I think from a transaction scalability and security standpoint, we'll see that happen. And I also expect to see the attempt to overregulate result in a pushback by a resurgence of the privacy narrative in Web3, where people realize that in the face of broad legislative mandates that you cannot do this and you cannot do that, you're going to see adoption of things like ZK VMs. So I'm expecting to see essentially on both sides of the barbell, identity, compliance, clearer legislation, and then scalability, transaction throughput, privacy as two-pronged. And to throw a bonus one in there, I'm expecting next year to see stable coins in some jurisdictions require identity for both sender and receiver. And so we may find ourselves in a bigger liquidity crunch next year, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, That's a very good overview of the market. Well, thank you very much, Oliver, for joining us today. So we have founder of Panther Protocol, co-founder of Beat, creative musical artist. Oliver, thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Have a great holidays as well.
So I'm back just for a minute to introduce our next panel. So as I said before, we are going to be discussing crypto journalism in the age of Elon Musk's Twitter. In crypto journalism in general, just not because of Elon Musk. A lot has happened. There have been CoinDesk stories that have caused ripples across the entire financial markets. The block has had to deal with questions about their journalistic integrity when it turned out they had been funded by Sam Bankman-Fried. So there is just a lot to unpack, and I'd like to introduce all of our guests and speakers. So I'm going to slowly be admitting them from the waiting room here. The moderator will be Connor Sephton from CMC's CoinMarketCap podcast. If you don't listen, you should. And yeah, welcome everyone. Once you get your videos on, you'll sort of pop up here. And I will then exit the chat again. Hi, Pete.
Is my video working?
We got everyone but Tiffany.
Can you guys hear me?
Hello, yes.
Oh, there you go.
Working?
Good. You're sideways, but
wait, let's see.
Figure that out.
Do I rejoin? Let's see.
Nice Christmas tree, Connor.
Thank you very much.
Real
Tiffany, you're
background
perfect now.
Oh, it's good now? You guys are all
real tree, fake background.
Tiffany, you just have to lean against
real
the
tree,
wall.
real background. I've got hamster baubles as well. Should I do it this way, vertically?
Nice.
Yeah, this is correct.
That seems. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Cool.
Well, hello everybody. Hi. So great to have you all with us. I'm Connor Sephton. As Molly said, I host CoinMarketCap's podcast and do their daily news to talk about crypto journalism in the age of Elon Musk's Twitter. I'm joined by some journalists you've actually heard of. And I just think we'll go around and kind of like introduce everybody. Pete, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Pete Rizzo, editor for Bitcoin Magazine, been a journalist in the cryptocurrency world since 2013. Excited for the conversation. Bitcoin Magazine hosts the largest conference in the industry. We're a thesis-driven publication. Our bent is that Bitcoin is the most important, if not only viable digital asset. But yeah, excited to talk about the whole ecosystem.
Brilliant. You're very welcome. Thanks for coming. Tiffany, how about you?
Hey, I'm somewhat new to the journalism world. I kind of fell into it after losing a lot of money to Celsius and just began reporting on things because I was looking them up myself. And then I kind of ended up with audio leaks from inside of the company, and then recently interviewed Sam Bankman-Fried a couple of times. So it's been quite a strange trajectory, but
strong start though. Very strong start though.
It's only been a couple of months.
Well, thank you for coming along. Joon, how about you?
Hey everyone. Like Pete, I got my start covering crypto at CoinDesk back in 2013. I then went to a couple of other publications, Quartz. I went back to CoinDesk, and I helped to co-found the Association of Cryptocurrency Journalists and Researchers, ACJR. Every time I say that, I wish we had come up with a shorter name. But it's a nonprofit. It's not a DAO yet. It may be in the future, but it's a nonprofit that's it's all about supporting and forwarding and raising the standards of the work we all do as journalists and researchers in this extremely difficult to cover space.
Yes, well, thank you very much for coming, and let's get straight into the questions. If you've got any questions, put them in the YouTube chat because I am keeping an eye on it. Any questions about crypto journalism or Elon Musk's Twitter and its impact on journalism, we're here to answer your questions. So first then, I guess a good place to start is, has Elon Musk acquiring Twitter been a net positive for crypto journalism? Tiffany, I guess I'll start with you on this one.
I mean, I'm new to crypto journalism, so I feel like a lot of it has been under Elon's reign.
Mm.
Um, I I mean, I think Twitter in general has been the main platform that I've been using. So I can't really speak to how journalism was very different prior to him taking control. But I yeah, I don't know that I have super insightful thoughts on this, but
I can
it's
jump in on that if that's okay. I would say, on the Bitcoin Magazine side, we're almost a Twitter first publication. I think when you're talking about delivering news and information to Twitter, as Tiffany said, to the cryptoverse, you have to be on Twitter. That's kind of where everything is. I think it's too early to tell, what if Elon's kind of affected anything specifically. I think certainly he's added a certain amount of chaos to the ecosystem, but from our standpoint as a publication, I think just Twitter is just so important to getting news out to people who are interested in cryptocurrency. That's almost, where the entire conversation takes place. And, I don't know what Elon could do to change that. I think it will persist. Twitter's had a good run, I think, since about 2015. It's really been the main source for crypto news. Before that, maybe it was more Reddit community based, small chat rooms. But yeah, Twitter is just so large and so dominant now. I like to say, Twitter defines the reality of crypto. That's how big it is for our ecosystem.
Joon, what's your take?
I mean, I think it's an interesting construct to think about Twitter as a news source or a publication, right? If Twitter is a news source, who's the editor? Well, it used to be, the safety team, Now the editor is Elon Musk, right? So I guess, is it a better publication now with Elon Musk editing it? It's unclear. I mean, it's a big publication. It's like if we think of Twitter as a publication, it's like a massive publication, right? So like some sections may be better, some may be worse.
It'd probably be the largest publication in the world. I mean, in terms of like words and like what's going out. I don't know how you would edit it, with any degree of like human effort.
Right. So they come up with various heuristics, right? Like Elon Musk recently banned the Elon Jets account, right? And the heuristic was, we're going to ban all accounts that talk about real-time locations of individuals. And so like, okay, if that's the heuristic and that's how we're editing the thing, is Twitter now a better or less useful news source? Arguably, it's worse.
Yeah, well, I want to expand on that because I was actually going to ask about Elon Jet. And, this account used publicly available information. It wasn't like some sort of like confidential record that no one else had access to. So I guess my next question was going to be, is Elon Musk only committed to free speech when it suits him?
Well, there was an interesting post. I didn't get a chance to validate the tweet, but there was some suggestions that Elon had previously said that, his support for free speech, extended to supporting that account. Again, hard to tell if it's a real post, but I did see that. So, I don't know. I think Elon's certainly looking a little bit more whimsical. I think, as Joon said, the real question here is, what's the oversight? So traditionally with journalism, you have kind of an organization that is accountable to the public in some ways. So if you think about how it was historically with the New York Times, going all the way back to like the 1900s, they would print all the news that was fit to print on a piece of paper. And essentially, the feedback mechanism was, advertisers and readers who would essentially, be able to give their feedback to the publication in various ways by either not buying it or not supporting it with advertising. So I think as you go back in history, like the feedback loop for journalism is almost better because there's people sort of directly spending money to acquire that information. And that creates sort of a check and balance. So with Twitter now, and obviously with, reporting online, a lot of that has gone away, right? So you can do bad reporting on Twitter and still have a massive following, right? And so that's when you get into kind of citizen journalism. I'm a big proponent, and I think Tiffany's story is great. Like a lot of people get into journalism naturally through being inquisitive, asking questions. I think Peter McCormack, like a very well-known Bitcoin podcaster, is the same way. Like, I think he is a Bitcoin journalist. Like, why? Because he does journalism. He doesn't do it because he's classically trained. He does it because he wants to have a relationship with his audience where he's truthful. So I almost look at that as, kind of refreshing, right? Journalism is needed, and it's actually a good practice because even if you are not a journalist, you can adopt the practices and they're useful, right? So that tells us journalism is like an independently good thing. But it needs checks and balances, like in the way that Joon's saying. And I think with Twitter, you have to take the news with a grain of salt.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with you. And Rube Rubman on YouTube says, Joon, you have an amazing hairstyle. So there you go. Kudos for that. Tiffany, Twitter Spaces has really taken off in crypto, hasn't it? Especially, I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried regularly appearing in them right up until his arrest. How valuable have you found Twitter Spaces, both, you know, when you're kind of working on stuff and wanting to kind of like get information? Is it a good tool for a journalist to have, do you think?
I think it's great to be able to have those kinds of conversations in real time and be able to get people on stage that wouldn't necessarily have access to someone like Sam or Elon or anyone like that. So I think that's great. I also do think that there is a component of it that I think might not be as helpful, because when I was talking to Sam one-on-one, I was able to like actually have a full on conversation with him and listen to his answers and be able to have some sort of somewhat planned trajectory of the conversation. But I remember like in Mario's space, which I think was very highly anticipated, I think a lot of people were jumping in, and Sam seemed very off-put by a lot of the questions. So I mean, in some cases it might not be as useful. I don't know how successful that one was. Although I think that those guys are pros at Twitter Spaces, so not a knock on them. But I've certainly seen some of that as well. So pros and cons, but I think it's great that people who might not have access to people like Sam or Elon are able to get their questions out there.
Yeah, very good point as well about the downside. That hadn't really occurred to me. Joon, have you got anything to add on that?
On Twitter Spaces, I mean,
yeah,
I think it's one of these funny, I forget that there's a word for this, but like, you know, it's old technologies remade into new technologies. So like, I feel like Twitter Spaces and Clubhouse, remember Clubhouse, guys? Like, they're like the classic radio call-in shows, right? Basically, there's a DJ, there's a radio show, they're interviewing the DJ, and then they take callers. And so like we've kind of remade radio, but just on Twitter. And look, those are great formats that work for many decades. So wonderful that it's here in Twitter.
Well, I think in this instance, it allowed the Sam Bankman-Fried story to continue in a way where he was actually put questions by people with cryptocurrency expertise. So, you know, when we talk about like the failure of the Aaron Ross Sorkin interview, you know, one of the issues was, while from like a traditional media perspective, his questions were kind of direct and cutting and, you know, had the certain kind of theatrical quality of journalism, they lacked some of the substance of, you know, what he did specifically wrong. And I think, you know, I don't know if we can take the conversation here, but I think the balance of power and authority has really swung towards crypto native journalism with the Sam Bankman-Fried story. I think, you know, Sam Bankman-Fried is a product of the mainstream media's sort of failures to understand the space, right? They come in when the sector is hot. They don't ask a lot of questions. They fall for the glitz and glamour. They miss the red flags. SBF is on all these covers around the world. And I think, you know, it was nice to see the cryptocurrency native journalists really assert. Ian Allison from CoinDesk coming in with really what is the gold standard scoop for the entire sector. I don't think there's been a better, more impactful story written in the 12 years that cryptocurrency journalism has existed. But, you know, that was the product of years of investment, work, development, you know, for us to create like an environment where journalists could do that. Right. So one of the things that I'm very critical of the mainstream media for is they continually do not invest in people who have knowledge about cryptocurrencies, right? We saw last year, Bloomberg, you know, came in, they're hiring all these editors and actively kind of choosing people without cryptocurrency expertise, right? So I think there's a huge hole for mainstream media, and I think it's a big wake-up call. They need to start taking this a bit seriously. Like, the industry is not going away, and we need to mitigate public harm. You know, Sam Bankman-Fried caused a lot of harm. A lot of people will lost money. A lot of people are going to have a worse Christmas this year because of Sam Bankman-Fried. So if you believe in journalism, I think that then that's something we need to counteract, right? Like the role of journalism has to be to try to mitigate such problems. I don't think it can, you know, solve them entirely, but I think it starts with taking it seriously. So I'll put a pin in it there.
And crypto native journalism, Pete, is really important. As you say, it's helped break this whole Sam Bankman-Fried story wide open, also covers many of the issues in the type of detail you wouldn't see with a national or an international media outlet. But that isn't to say, is it, that some crypto publications aren't without their issues. And specifically, I'm talking about what we learned last week with the block. And we found out that SBF was secretly funding the site's CEO without anyone else's knowledge. How serious is that for the credibility of crypto journalism? Is it going to be a long-term problem?
Who wants to jump in on that? It's definitely very serious. Joon, do you want to take the first swing?
I mean, yeah, if I may, I have thoughts on that. I think, media, basically the problem is media ownership, right? Who owns the media? And you have this problem. You have this problem despite no matter what is being covered, right? So if like prestige news publications, you have multiple billionaires owning multiple newspapers, Jeff Bezos at the Post, Murdoch and multiple newspapers, etc. Those are well-known dynamics, right? And one of the funny things is, and I don't know if many people know this, like the dual class share structure, right? Where you have one class of stock with super voting rights and another class of common stock with much less rights. Was invented by a newspaper company, right? The Ox Salzburgers invented it to retain control of the New York Times company so that they could both raise money from the public and retain control of the company. And of course, the irony is that is the very structure that was embraced by Silicon Valley, which now has huge problems with the New York Times. So that's a funny, corporate irony, corporate structure irony there. But the point is, ownership remains an issue. I think, for example, with CoinDesk, it's owned by DCG, right? And I've worked at CoinDesk over the years, and the charge was always somehow the agenda of CoinDesk was reflective of, Barry Silbert's personal agenda or DCG's personal agenda, right? So those kinds of things don't go away so long as the publication is owned by a corporation or an individual. My proposal is that we have this great technology to decentralize ownership of things. And maybe Rizzo might look at me askance at that, but the claim of cryptocurrencies and DAOs and Web3 is that we can decentralize ownership of things. We should decentralize ownership of the paper of record of media that covers the industry. And I think that's the most powerful lever that we can pull in terms of using the technology and applying it to the journalism industry. And what do I mean by that? You can replicate, for example, a trust structure with a smart contract, right? So The Guardian, for example, is a large newspaper in the UK. It's owned by a trust. It's not owned by a company. It's not owned by a family. That trust has been set up to fund The Guardian in perpetuity, okay? So you can imagine replacing that trust with a smart contract. And you can imagine, for example, a nonprofit body of the various actors in the industry funding that smart contract, and that smart contract disbursing certain amounts of funding to the publication every year based on various milestones. With that, I think you create a situation where the industry is firewalled from the publication, and the publication is freed from charges of reflecting the agenda of any one particular company or individual in the industry. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, no, I think you make a really good point. I guess my question in response to that would be, how likely is it that we're going to see something like this in the short to medium term? Do you think that in the next 5 years, for instance, we'd see a major crypto publication be funded or structured this way?
If I can just
I think absolutely you'll see it tried. And I would kind of jump in and take where, and kind of split off from Joon. We're saying, like, I absolutely agree with Joon that the problem with the block situation is ownership and people not really understanding how ownership structures within crypto media work. I mean, in almost all cases, the major crypto media publications have a single owner with like a business interest in the industry, right? So I'm absolutely a huge fan of moving to some sort of multi-stakeholder ownership where there's some group or kind of coordinating oversight. My one kind of quibble is I think, the idea of, decentralized ownership. I mean, certainly I think you can distribute the ownership of kind of these wallets and contracts with cryptocurrency technologies, but remains to be seen whether they can really solve like the voting and governance structure problems that really come with something like, many shareholders owning an operating thing. I mean, you're still going to have, like issues you had with MakerDAO where votes happen, like somebody can have a massive stakeholdership with, buying up an ownership of tokens. Like, I mean, even if this is a DAO and it's, 75% owned by some entity, who has a controlling stake with the tokens, you can end up in the same situation. So I would just, caution to say it's, it remains to be seen. Like everything cryptocurrency, I think beyond Bitcoin, I mean, it's still very early experiments. I think, should we see it tried? I'm sure people will try, right? Because I do agree with Joon that the problem really is, we have essentially these organizations that need to be accountable to the public in some way, but their ownership structure, creates all these questions. And I think, the one thing I would add on that is in the case of the block, I mean, the controversy is not about their performance as journalists or researchers, right? So that's why we're saying, hey, the problem is ownership. You can say, oh, why didn't the journalists dig into the past of their owner or founder? You have to remember cryptocurrency media startups are startups, right? These are people who, they need to work to put food on the table. This was like a small 5 to 6 person company in the last bear market. I'm sure they put a lot of trust in other individuals who were bought into that cause. And it looks like in this case, like the same way with Sam Bankman-Fried, there was a bad actor, right? There was somebody who was willing to lie, manipulate, misrepresent themselves to their peers, like people they showed up in the office every day. And look, I'm sure they'll go back. I'm sure they'll question. I'm sure they'll think there are red flags. I just think that, the ownership model for crypto media, there's certainly a lot of problems currently. Unclear what we need to do to solve that. But I think certainly migrating away from like a single ownership structure, would be productive.
Yeah. Tiffany, I just want to ask you about the concerns that Twitter could implode under Elon Musk's leadership. There were some doomsday kind of predictions going around that because of the quite swinging job cuts that we saw at Twitter, that we could see systems fall over and things get knocked offline. If that was to happen, this doomsday scenario of Twitter imploding, how would that affect the crypto space and crypto journalism more generally? Because crypto really congregates on Twitter, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, that's personally the main platform that I use. I mean, I have a little YouTube channel as well, but I don't use it as frequently. But yeah, that would be very problematic. I mean, I personally don't know how else I would get as much information as quickly to as many people out there. So yeah, that is certainly something to think about. I haven't I haven't set up another account on. I guess what are the competitors? Mastodon, I believe, or something like
Mastodon,
yeah,
yes.
Mastodon is not heavily populated.
But I'm sure that the reach right now would not be nearly as great as Twitter's. So that would be highly problematic. I don't see it as a real impending possibility at the very moment, but that would be a problem. What do you guys think?
Well, I'd jump in and just say, cryptocurrency journalism and, citizen journalism, kind of like what you're doing, has existed since, the dawn of Bitcoin, right? So if you go back to the early Bitcoin forums, obviously when I was joining, you may not know this, but, Reddit was the big source of Bitcoin news. And I used to joke that CoinDesk was often, the news that appeared on Reddit one day later. Reddit was this kind of great hive of people kind of posting and aggregating things and asking questions about what back then was just, the Bitcoin ecosystem. So yeah, I mean, you're always going to see people want to congregate and to relay information. So, I mean, if Twitter goes bust, then, in the unlikely incident that happens, I'm sure, in the Jurassic Park way, life will find a way. The conversation will continue. But Twitter just has a real-time immediacy of interaction that I think, if you look at the other social platforms, like they just don't deliver. And, because of that, I think, it'll have staying power irregardless of, Musk's proclivities to its management.
Well, what I'll say is, there's one big structural difference between Twitter and all the other platforms, which is it allows the intermingling of the different tribes, right? So like, sure, there's still Reddit and there's still our Ethereum and our Bitcoin and so on, but like those communities don't intermingle, right? Just the same way they have their own discords and forums. And Twitter is really a place where all of those people, they sort of coexist most of the time. They don't overlap, but at certain times they do, right? Like SBF is a great example. And you have all the different tribes sort of able to comment and riff off what's going on in the other communities. So I think that's the big structural advantage that Twitter has. And I don't really see that elsewhere right now. Like it's going to be, I think that's the irreplaceable part, really. Like real-time stuff, you can still get that on Discord and so on, but the cross-pollination, I think, is very tough to replicate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Twitter really specialized on one thing, right? Like they specialized on being a place where information could interact without boundaries, as Joon said. And I think, you know, maybe we'll see another Silicon Valley type company, like, you know, try to start something similar, but it would, you know, it'd be hard to see how you would rival the Twitter experience.
So we've got 5 minutes left and I've got 2 questions. So we're going to do some quick fire answers. I'm going to give you 30 seconds each for these answers. And if you exceed the time limit, this cushion of my dead hamster will let you know. So next question then. We now see many crypto CEOs make announcements directly to their followers rather than going through the media. So is the role of journalists now changing away from the breaking news that people might pick up from a direct source on Twitter and more to deeper reporting and exclusives? I mean, Tiffany, you've kind of shown like if you get the exclusive interviews, if you do the deep reporting, people will pay attention.
That's certainly true. And I also don't think that people necessarily trust the word of any CEOs directly. I mean, as we've seen, like Sam Bankman-Fried in the days prior to the collapse was saying that all funds are safe. And same with Alex Mashinsky with Celsius. So I don't know that that has enough, like that much weight, like a CEO saying that everything's great and safe and everything. So I still think that everyone else's voice really matters and people are still looking for other outside opinions and sources. So I'm not too threatened by that personally. But yeah, getting an exclusive is certainly helpful as well. And I mean, I connected with Sam via Twitter because he had seen my Celsius leaks on Twitter and that's why he started following me. So I mean, that was even how we connected in the first place and how we set up and arranged our first phone calls. So I mean, it's certainly been a helpful tool for me. Oh, I don't know if I've taken over 30 seconds. Sorry.
You almost got a glimmer of bagel then, but you're all right. Joon.
Sorry, moving my cursor. Yeah, I agree with everything Tiffany said. You know, one of the mantras of Silicon Valley is, you know, go direct, right? You don't need the media. Well, that only works if people trust you. And it turns out that lots of these people are not trustworthy and should not be trusted. And so that's the whole role of the media, is to verify, right? So 100% agree with Tiffany there.
Pete, anything to add?
Yeah, I think crypto media can do 2 valuable things right now. It can do what CoinDesk did in the instance of the SBF reporting, which is provide material, non-public information to the public that would otherwise be very costly to obtain. And the second thing is thesis-driven research and journalism. So it's very early in the whole technology space of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. There are a lot of questions about fundamentally how these things work, how they'll hold value over time, how they'll secure people's assets. These are questions that need to be asked. Quite proud of the Bitcoin Magazine team on the research side for sounding the alarm early on SBF, but you know, that's again because we had a more skeptical lens on the space. And I think, you know, if there's a lesson from SBF, it's that everybody needs skepticism. And I think to the extent that the crypto media can put on that skeptical hats, be a bit more of the Bitcoin maximalist side, you know, be skeptical, ask more questions. I think that'll kind of get us through.
Yeah. So last question then, and in a sentence, basically, guys, what's your advice for anyone who wants to become a crypto journalist? I think we've all come to this through different routes. Tiffany, I mean, you've really made a big impact in a short space of time, and the reasoning behind why you started doing what you do is fascinating. What's your advice for kind of getting the traction that you have?
I mean, I didn't come into this hoping to be a journalist or like even like seeking a lot of followers or anything. I genuinely, like, I lost a lot of money to Celsius. I had skin in the game and I just knew what I was looking up. So I was providing the information to people that I personally cared to know as a creditor. So I came at it from that standpoint, like not just like trying to find some salacious and sensational headline or anything. I just was looking up things that I wanted to know. So, I mean, I think that was helpful, like to get into the mind of the people who are actually affected by the situation. That was helpful to me. And from there, I mean, obviously, like when the Sam story broke, I knew that was the contact. So, I mean, I wanted to know more. Like, and he said that that's part of why he talked to me. I approached him kind of actually asking questions about what happened, and because I genuinely wanted to know, and he said that that's why he wanted to speak with me.
That's a really good point you've just made, because a big part of being a journalist and having that impact is understanding what your readers want and what your readers need and what your readers are going through. And if you're disconnected from any of those things, it really does, it doesn't, the product isn't as good. So I think you make a really good point there. P, what's your advice for anyone who might want to join the dumpster fire of news?
Oh yeah, I'll keep it short. Ask questions, question your questions, and be honest. Crypto journalism is just the search for the truth. There isn't really anything other than that. Anyone can do it.
Beautifully put. Joon.
Yeah, I think it's similar to Pete and Tiffany, but I would specifically say, go to the source, right? If you're trying to write about Bitcoin, read the Bitcoin white paper, go to the GitHubs, like go to where the devs are talking about different BIPs, right? If it's Ethereum, do the same thing. If it's a finance thing, read all the financial, literature that you can get your hands on and learn about the thing. So go direct, because I think we have a lot of journalists who don't do that, right? They kind of go through an abstracted layer of stuff and then write about the thing. So go direct. And then if I may add another one, talk to your peers, get support from your peers, join ACJR. That's where all the journalists are. That's acjr.network. Go there and join the Telegram group.
Yeah, the last thing I'd add, really, my tip is just be, as well as all the tips that we've got from Pete, Joon, and Tiffany, focus on the writing. A big, big part of the job is making sure that you're communicating your story as clearly and as engaging as possible. So really work on the craft of writing. That's a huge tenet. And we write very technical things every day. There's often a lot of kind of granularity with what we're writing. It's really important to make sure that your writing is as crystal clear as possible. And the old motto, I'm about to be booted off by my own hamster. The old motto is, imagine you're running up to the top of a bus, breathless after running up a hill, and you're telling your friend what the story is, and you just say, Sam Bankman-Fried has been arrested. You wouldn't go, on December the 9th, the Southern District of New York. You wouldn't do that. Keep it clean, keep it simple, keep it engaging. Right. Well, we're nearly running out of time. And I just want to thank Pete, Joon, and Tiffany for coming along, and you for watching this panel on crypto journalism, which is, it's a very interesting time right now. We're all going to be all right, aren't we?
I hope so.
Just a little bear market. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely fine. But make sure you do stay tuned, because we have got 2 more panels coming up. And next, we're going to be hearing about the EU and what it stands to gain from America's crypto policy fumble. So that's going to be interesting as well.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connor.
Thanks, bud.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. I'm popping back in to do some more introductions. Feel free to stick around in the waiting room or anything on Twitter, on YouTube, and keep watching.
Yeah, I got to hop to a meeting, but thanks for having me, guys. Tiffany, it was great to meet you. Definitely interested to see where you take things. And Joon, good to see the hair's getting long.
Great hairstyle. Nice meeting you both.
Cheers, guys.
Great to meet everyone. Thanks for having me. Thank you. Bye.
All right, great. It's just me again. Yes.
Bye.
So bye. Anyway, yeah. So thank you, Connor, for moderating that panel. For those that don't know or don't already listen, as I've said before, both Connor and myself are the co-hosts of the CoinMarketCap podcast that you can listen to wherever you get your podcast. If you want to learn more about crypto news, what's happening each day, Connor has a short and sweet segment 5 days a week, 4 days a week. And then the last day is when the two of us have a conversation about news. So definitely something to listen to if you're interested in that kind of thing. Now, to introduce the next segment as we wait for our guests to join us, as Connor said, we will be talking about what the EU potentially stands to gain from America's crypto policy fumble. I think that we'll be discussing this, but I think you could argue both sides of the coin. It's definitely possible that some people think America is doing a really great job in terms of crypto regulation. I would argue probably on the other side, as we've mentioned on this live stream already, Senator Elizabeth Warren proposed a bill today that would greatly restrict users' privacy options in crypto. And I think that there have definitely been issues with the SEC and the FTC, CFTC in America, saying a lot, but not doing very much. Anyway, without further ado, I will start this panel. We have Teana joining us now, and we'll be adding Maya whenever she joins, but we will get Teana in the chat. Hello. Make sure I can hear you. Can you say hello to the audience?
Hello to the audience.
Okay, perfect. I was afraid you were muted. Yeah, so we've actually spoken before on a different CMC live stream, I think 2 or 3 years ago. So it's nice to see you back. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Molly.
All right, and we're going to bring in Maya now. So I will introduce both of you guys when you join. I'll start with Teana because obviously you are here. So we have with us Teana Baker-Taylor, who is the VP of Policy and Regulatory Strategy at Circle. And then we have Maya Zehavi, who is a crypto investor. If you guys want to say a little bit more about, what qualifications bring you to this holiday live stream, go right ahead.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start. So I lead policy and regulatory strategy at Circle, specifically focused on EMEA. Prior to this role, I also led policy at the Chamber of Digital Commerce in DC. I've worked for Binance and Crypto.com, leading their UK and EU operations. And I also helped to form a global regulatory advocacy body called Global Digital Finance that works with standard setters like FATF and the OECD and IMF and organizations like that.
Great to have you.
Thanks.
So I've been in the space since about 2014, mostly focused on enterprise side until about 2018. I got to know Teana when she was at the GDR. And previously engaged with policymakers around crypto, both in the enterprise side, securities, regulatory compliance, and on the crypto asset side.
Yeah, Maya and I slaved away on a taxonomy for policymakers. And oh gosh, what was that, 2016, 2017? One of the many taxonomies.
Wow. And how did that end up? Successful?
We have a new taxonomy now.
Taxonomy is one of the things we're always working on, it seems like.
It's just sort of never ending. Interesting. Great. So I'm just going to go ahead with my first question, which will be pretty open-ended, and then I can get to sort of the more specific points that we discussed over email this week. So just to set the stage, in the US, crypto regulation is being very heavily debated. What I wrote down is that, Montana's Democratic Senator John Tester said this week that digital assets should just be banned. Senator Warren released that draft of a bill today, the privacy, that I haven't had time to fully review because it came out sort of right before this live stream. But so could you guys help us set the stage for what's going on with US policy, and basically, do you think they're doing a bad job? Or a good job?
I'd say as like I see myself as a more objective person in this debate because I'm not focused specifically on the EU or the US. I think the US doesn't really have a crypto policy. They've been debating a lot of legislations and a lot of different regulations, and mostly centered around the debate of how tokens apply under the Howey's law. And that is really in contrast to both how the EU and the UK under the FCA have approached crypto, meaning they've kind of put aside that debate and rewrote a taxonomy to think of crypto either as stablecoins or asset-based or utility tokens. And by doing that, they could advance the conversation into a more encompassing framework where we can actually have a substantive discussion about what kind of role and disclosures you need for crypto intermediaries, for stable coins, and what kind of disclosures for all the different intermediaries involved in the market infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think that most jurisdictions have struggled, considering that in a lot of cases, regulatory frameworks come from, market-based activities, where crypto assets kind of span across a number of different types of activities. And so it's difficult to say, okay, well, this specific cohort of activities will be regulated like this. And so when jurisdictions try to approach it from an activity-based perspective, whether it's custody or, trading or issuance of tokens, then it starts to become very specific in each one of those activities. And I think that the UK certainly, Singapore and the US have been looking at those individual based activities and identifying risks that they're uncomfortable with. If you compare that to the EU, they took a very holistic approach and said, we're going to bring everything basically that we feel like we fully understand. So, kind of leaving out NFTs and leaving out portions of DeFi and bring everything else under this one umbrella. And really that was driven from, this catalyst that was Libra and the DM token, which basically kind of freaked, Europe out. And they had real concerns around monetary stability. And so they decided that they were going to regulate the whole space. They also wanted to limit the regulatory arbitrage across the European trading zone. And so they applied this to, all 27 member states. So it's quite unique when we look around the world because this type of holistic framework that covers this amount of trading activity doesn't exist anywhere else. So I think that the US has been focused on trying to develop what their policy is, but again, looking at it in a very specific way based on market activity. And we're seeing that with stablecoins, for example. So stablecoins are probably the one area where we're seeing policymakers around the world, but very specifically in the US and the UK and Singapore, as probably the first major element of the industry that I think we'll see some semi-consistent and potentially harmonized regulatory guidance for.
I just add, and not to rub it in, but I think a lot of the difference between the EU, the UK, and MAS in Singapore is the fact that specifically MAS and the FCA and Bank of England were very tech focused in the innovation ways. So I can only testify as to how I came in contact with them and really learned about these policies. And that was mostly discussing different POCs, proofs of concept of different technology. So for example, we had conversations back in, just think how insane this sounds, back in 2017, both with MAS and Bank of England about using zero knowledge proofs for compliance of CBDCs. Now, everyone's shilling it in the end of 2022, like it's a given or it's an obvious. But the fact that you had two major regulators who really are at the forefront, unlike the US in a lot of cases, come in and really dig deep and understand the limitations and the trade-offs with using the actual tech promise to deliver what they want in a regulatory way, actually gives them much more substantive insights into the limitations and to understand the subtleties of the technology. So for example, if you were to look at a lot of what Warren put forth on privacy and on different AML measures, you won't see that, I believe, from Singapore or the EU, mostly because they've actually looked at how the tech can serve them on a compliance aspect, meaning how can you, if all the smart people in crypto keep on telling them, you don't get it, they actually went to and did their homework. And now they do understand where they can work with regulations and where crypto can actually disintermediate a lot. And I just want to caveat some of this and kind of maybe compare the US approach of like Senator Tesser's ban it all, close it down. We can do it all. We're the US and we can tell everyone to just shut up. Well, the US actually did do something very similar to that in the binary options market. For those who aren't familiar, about 15 years ago, maybe 20, global binary options became super popular. I have some insight of it because a lot of it was operated actually from Israel and then from the EU. And because it was so infused with fraud and outright money laundering, what happened was that very big scoops that came out of Israeli journalism pushed the US to shut it down. And it started with the EU kicking everyone out, and then, well, first Israel, and then the EU kicked every binary option, and then the US said, we won't let anyone do this, and that's it. It was dead on arrival within about 2-3 years. You can't do that to crypto. And the reason is, one, there is actual innovation and code that make programmable money a solution, not only for NFTs or for magic boxes for staking, but for actual uses that might not be that obvious yet, but they're funding a completely different computing infrastructure that we can't just dismiss because some older generation senator can't relate to how that can really come back to another legislative proposal that he has on social networks, say.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I'd add on that too, that you brought up, the FCA and MAS and even Israel. So if we compare those jurisdictions, certainly MAS and the FCA.
Israel has no regulatory clarity.
Let me finish. These jurisdictions are smaller, right? And so we have one major regulator in the UK, one major regulator in Singapore. And those regulators have had a history, whether you think that is productive or not, of hosting and actually utilizing sandbox environments. For some parts of financial services, they've been very effective. For others, not so much. But it does create the art of the possibility in the mind of the regulator. And so I think for those jurisdictions that don't have an alphabet soup of financial regulators that are potentially jockeying for position to be the ones that oversee this space, they're really only negotiating between the Treasury, the regulator, and the central bank. And so I think it's easier in those instances to potentially come up with a path forward, whereby in the US, we have a very different situation. So I think that's part of the kind of political environment that makes it even more challenging in the US. So, and I would say, just on the case of ban it, one thing that we see, and I'm sure that Senator Warren wouldn't come outright and say this, but oftentimes bills are written and proposed for messaging purposes, equally as much as for proposing legislation. And so I think that the majority of the powers that be, certainly in US Congress and around the world, understand that, the horse has left the barn. We're not banning anything here. And it would be nigh impossible. And I think that, a number of people yesterday during the hearing, were very clear about that the banning crypto is not even possible at this stage.
Let's just go back to, because you brought up like the US approach and the sandboxes. The fact is that, and maybe I'm not objective about this, but I think we've seen more innovation come out of the permissionless characteristics of crypto than all the regulatory sandboxes put together in fintechs and everything, right? And Senator Warren's bill, personally, I just find it disappointing, because I think someone like her, with her deep understanding of investor protections and retail and bankruptcy laws, should have been able to give a much more substantive and productive framework to actually meet the goals that she set forth, and not necessarily just say cancel it all, kind of like the Red Queen and Alice in Wonderland. And in that sense, part of that bill that says, hey, we're just going to gatekeep every single crypto project and developer and farm, it's not only ridiculous, it just lacks the appreciation for what has been built, and comparing that to the regulatory arbitrage of what we used to call as fintech over the last decade or so. And I think with the global macro at the end of 22, we can really see what all these fintech companies, neobanks, BNPL, have actually provided the financial system or retail or consumers. And I think they delivered a lot less than the initial promise of fintech. Whereas crypto in general, even if you say that all of this is 99% fraud, the actual infrastructure that is getting built and the intermediaries and the research is going to provide much more utility for consumers worldwide, not only as an investment.
Well, I have some questions. But you guys have answered like a fair amount of them already. But you know, as some say, the best panels are the ones where the moderator really just, you know, can sit back and let people just talk. So I'm trying to think. I think what I want to touch on right now is, you know, after Senator Warren's bill, one of the biggest things that are sort of industries that are the most difficult to regulate across all jurisdictions is decentralized finance, because there's no way for a decentralized finance exchange really to register somewhere in simplest terms. And so what Maya had asked me to talk about, which is, what do you guys think the guiding principles could be for regulating DeFi to prevent projects from leaving areas that do have some sort of framework to going to other areas? You know, just like the background is, one of the criticisms about the US regulatory policy is, if it had been better, then exchanges like FTX would have done things only within the US framework, and then investors would have been protected. We know that didn't happen because FTX ended up being a pretty bad actor, even FTX US. But anyway, I'll stop talking now. The question is, guiding principles for regulating DeFi so that they will stay in jurisdictions where customers can be protected.
So I think there's a couple things, and you know, I'll leave it to Maya to get into the nitty details. But from a centralized versus a decentralized perspective, I think what we saw in FTX was all centralized risk, right? There's one guy or a very small cohort of people that have a lot of control, and very little governance or oversight, period, right? And so from that environment, you know, it is very easy to propagate malfeasance and fraud. And you know, I'm sure as the story, you know, comes to fruition, we'll be able to understand a little bit more about how and why and when all of that started to occur. However, throughout this, you know, there's been a number of let's say, you know, DeFi contracts where the value that was locked in those contracts, when everyone else is kind of locked out during bankruptcy proceedings, those contracts continue to settle, and those customers, you know, are getting their money back. And so I think this is a demonstration of how, you know, code continues to work, right? It's people that you can't trust necessarily. Now, when you look at this through a regulator's perspective, you know, and they're considering how do we embed measures for consumer protection, and essentially that is the regulator's job, right? Protect the market and protect consumers. I think that the things that are being discussed around this, you know, if we'd have had this in place, it wouldn't have happened here, around disclosures, segregation of funds, you know, proof of reserves, all these things we're talking about, audits, et cetera. None of those things without a centralized entity can operate in the exact same way that they do in centralized finance. But Maya and I have been talking a lot lately about what could you do within the smart contract itself? What could you do within, you know, the platform code that would put those governance mechanisms in place in a way that they're automated and they're auditable, but not necessarily overseen by a person. And I think that is where the promise of DeFi comes in, because ultimately, at the end of the day, even if we'd have had regulatory clarity, you know, that doesn't prevent fraud. Fraud and malfeasance is just, you know, something that can and does happen anywhere and everywhere, whether you're regulated or not. One thing I would say, though, is in jurisdictions where we do have regulatory clarity, it does give those market participants that intend to offer regulated services and grow responsibly and with governance in mind, an opportunity to do so. And so if you have the confidence to build products and services across multiple jurisdictions and invest in your business because you don't think somebody's going to come and shut you down, then chances are those venues start to grow with, you know, healthy, sustainable liquidity, which then attracts more liquidity. And then maybe some of these offshore and nearshore exchanges become less attractive. Maya, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. I think we should have said this like in the beginning of just talking. I think I tweeted this earlier. Any discussion from here on forward about regulations or policy should start with, would this have stopped FTX from going this big? And any rule or any legislation should see what kind of disclosures would you have been able to verify about FTX to stop it. And that actually goes back to legal structures of very convoluted offshore banking systems. And I'm saying this as it relates back to DeFi, because DeFi, just like Teana said, is pretty simple and upfront. Once you have the smart code in place, you know what's going to happen. And sometimes you can stop, like the actual project team can stop it. So just to make this discussion maybe more productive, let's kind of try to categorize the three players in DeFi. We have the devs, the actual projects, right? Then we have the users, people who invest or use these products. And thirdly, we have different projects whose assets or tokens are traded on DeFi. Now, back in 2018, I was very against DeFi because of the idea of leverage. I thought was going to create like systematic risk across all the chains. But because DeFi has so far really developed mostly over collateralized credit on chain, we saw that it would settle very fast. Now, the fear of regulatory clarity for devs, for users, and for these tokens is because if they go to the regulator and say, hey, I want to build a future swap on Solana, or I want to issue some tokens, they're going to get a big no. So they just go ahead, they do it offshore, no clarity as to who the owners is or nothing. And then after the SEC 2 years later says, hey, maybe this isn't that exactly what we meant, they pay a little minuscule fine, a slap on the wrist. Now, the DeFi legislation, as it's been proposed, both through the DCCPA, which is the legislation that I think it was Loomis and I forget which senator co-sponsored this, based on FTX lobbying. Teana, did you remember this? Loomis and?
Yeah, the Loomis-Gillibrand bill is a different bill.
Gillibrand, yeah. So
the
both the
DCCPA is the Bankman
and
bill.
the new Warren bill are essentially two different tools to come in and try to gatekeep both the devs, both the token issuers and the users by saying, hey guys, all three of these archetypes of players within the DeFi ecosystems are basically money launderers. And we don't know how to tell the difference. So we want to be able to say yes or no to anyone. And the whole philosophical idea behind crypto in general is, hey, we're not going to ask permission. We want you to explain the principle and the rule, and we're going to automate it. And the reason for that is because we don't want to feel like there's prejudice and only the insiders who get to go with their daddy and meet each senator individually will get a preference, any preferential treatments and be heard, right? Which is essentially what happened with the DCCPA and SBF. Now, the more practical implementation of these laws so far have been that we saw US-based DeFi projects have to stop the way they were operating their DeFi smart contracts and surveillance, and how they were hosting the front end, and very publicly tell their users, guys, we're going to have to start collecting addresses. That means metadata on each and every user, i.e. IP addresses, wallet addresses, MAC address as they connect to the front end, in order for them to go back and report to US regulators, hey, this is the data of our users, they can cross-reference it now. And by doing so, they create their own graph tool to track crypto and money laundering now, right? In essence, what that does is socialize the cost of the regulators failing to enforce existing laws on bad actors in crypto and force all of us to be subject to these rules. And we've seen a lot of US projects basically try to get ahead of that and start offering decentralized front end or different solutions where users don't necessarily have to go through their own gatekeep. And I think we're going to see more of that as legislation goes forth in the US.
So we probably have time for about one more question before we wrap up. So I think I will ask about the global regulatory requirements. You guys have talked a lot about global jurisdictions. Teana, in the beginning, you talked about stablecoin regulation potentially being the next thing to look for in 2023. What do you guys think 2023 could bring? Are there any jurisdictions that are going to be able to sort of put out this legislator that then could be the example for other people to follow globally? Or is there just a lot more work left before we see anything concrete in the next year?
I think it depends specifically on, what you mean by, clarity in the next year. I definitely think that we will see certain elements of the ecosystem come under the regulatory purview over the next 12 months for sure. We know that MiCA will be finally voted on in February and will come into force within 12 months after that. So again, that brings kind of 27 member states. There is a real push by the Europeans to influence other jurisdictions to basically harmonize against MiCA. Some parts of MiCA are great. Some parts of MiCA are not as great. And so I think what that does is creates potential competition opportunities for other jurisdictions to replicate the parts of MiCA that make sense, and maybe the areas of MiCA that still have some contentiousness around them, create some opportunities for those jurisdictions where maybe they treat assets differently than MiCA does. So I think when you kind of look through the lens of the benefits of a first mover advantage, I think for some jurisdictions, being in that kind of fast follower, second mover position could be potentially, very competitive for those jurisdictions. So I mentioned stable coins before. On the AML piece, one of the things that comes to my mind when I look at legislation proposed by, Senator Warren is, we've been talking about AML and CTF, for years. And if we get to a point where jurisdictions start to out FATF, then, we're in a problem. So we're still in this period of ensuring that jurisdictions, 120 of them who are Financial Action Task Force members, are implementing the 40 recommendations that FATF put forward in 2019. And if, we have potential legislation or regulation like we did in Europe into the transfer funds regulation that is basically more onerous than FATF, and they ended up pulling that back in Europe for the reason that if you can't find something to harmonize to or align to, then we're going to have real problems. So I think that the money laundering situation is a bit out-timed, and I think that we've kind of addressed that as a community. I don't think that that's the real challenge. I do think that we're going to see some significant focus put into market integrity, and so that, going back to centralized and decentralized, that is an area that regulators can potentially put rules in place that outline criteria for operating in a certain way. You must have a board. You must have a CFO. You must report your, financial every month. Some kind of, level of transparency around what your business is doing. And then I do think that the conversation around DeFi, thankfully, will continue. I don't think we're going to see anything major in DeFi regulation. Certainly not in the UK or Europe, and I don't think in some of the other major treasury jurisdictions like Singapore and Japan anytime soon. I think that regulators understand that there's a lot about the technology and the way that it could potentially work to solve and mitigate risk that we don't yet completely know, and certainly that they don't know. And so I think that pause is a good thing. But I do think we're going to see a real focus on governance.
All right, Maya, we got 2 minutes before our next segment. Do you have anything to add, contradict, explain?
Yeah, I'll just like kind of headline what Teana just said as like a crypto Glass-Steagall. I think that's really what we're going to see, that centralized crypto asset providers are going to be required for a minimum, and that minimum is going to be very clear, i.e. not only have a CFO and audits, but have segregated accounts, maybe don't be both a lending and a custodian. Make sure you have proper reporting as to how you store all your wallets and what your wallets are, so someone knows even if you go bankrupt. Very, very basic requirements that might get a global consensus through the G20. but we're not going to really see legislation. And if we do, it's going to come from Europe as a first mover. And let's just remember that all of big tech has been complying with the GDPR, because Europe sometimes gets the upper hand on regulations and legislations.
Well, thank you guys so much for this. I'm sure we'll have you on for future chats now that we're doing more events. And yeah, happy holidays. Thank you very much.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
So next up, we will be discussing the Metaverse with an NFT collector that a lot of you on Twitter probably have heard of. His name is Punk6529, and he will be joining us very soon. In 2022, the Metaverse is one of the most common words, buzzwords, real words, depending on where you fall on your bullishness or bearishness for what the Metaverse can do. We've seen metaverses ranging from what Mark Zuckerberg is attempting to do with his centralized, kind of web 2 vision. You've obviously seen a lot of issues with it. The characters don't actually have any legs. On the other hand, there have been a lot of innovations in terms of more crypto native metaverses that are fully blockchain based. You've seen the Sandbox, Decentraland, all of these metaverses that have a sort of play to earn, sometimes NFT, element to them. And so as soon as Punk6529 joins us, we're going to talk with him a little bit about, being anonymous or pseudonymous on the internet, how their vision for an open metaverse, which is something they've been working on for a while now, is going, where it started, where it's going, where they see NFTs, because it's not only the metaverse that has seen a sort of rise and then slight tapering off in terms of enthusiasm. There definitely has been in the NFT market, you're not selling NFTs of rocks anymore. Remember the Ether rocks for millions and millions of dollars. Things have tapered off. Let me just see if I can send a message and make sure he's coming in. Well, while we wait, I will think of other things to say about NFTs and a little bit more about CMC. So, we are doing events for the first time. If you've noticed, this week we had a Twitter space about Satoshi Disappearance Day that took place on Monday. It was over a decade since Satoshi was last online. Anyway, here we have Punk joining us now. You don't have to listen to me chatter on. So yeah, as soon as you turn your video on, although video or NFT avatar on, we'll be able to talk. Otherwise, no video. Anyway, we'll just start. Why don't you say hi to the CMC audience that's here now?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
Perfect. So I think my first question for you is going to be very relevant because you have, some voice changing going on. Could you tell us a little bit about why you choose to be pseudonymous on the internet?
That's a great question. There were 3 reasons I did it. The first reason was I wanted to try the space natively. And so, obviously, we're going to use avatars in the NFT world and in the metaverse, and I put metaverse in quotes. Metaverse meaning, I think the metaverse is just going to be the internet, but with better visualization and persistent digital objects. And in that world, a lot of people will have avatars. A lot of people will have use pseudonymous primarily. A lot of people say anonymous, but it's not anonymous, it's all pseudonymous. anonymous, you wouldn't have any continuity from one event to another, right? Like someone would say something, and then someone else would say something, and you wouldn't know if it's the same person, right? So here there is very strong consistency, arguably more strong consistency than eponymous social media accounts, right? You actually don't know if you saw Punk6529 on multiple social networks, you actually don't know if it's the same person. In fact, I spend a good chunk of my time telling people, no, that Punk6529 that friended you on Instagram and wants to talk about crypto is not me, right? But the person who has that token in their account is consistently the same person, right? So that's number one. Number two, 6529 has a very specific mission, and that very specific mission is focusing on an open, decentralized metaverse. And I want people to focus on that. I mean, I, as a person, might have different interests. Maybe I like pizza, but who cares, right? That's from my Facebook account. On my Facebook account, I can tell people I had pizza tonight, but that's not what 6529 is all about, right? 6529 is on a specific mission.
And so, do you recommend pseudonymity for other people that work in crypto for that reason?
I think everyone should try it. It's interesting. And, there's different layers of it, right? So some people use an avatar but are eponymous. And that's interesting. I mean, I think everyone's going to have an avatar. That part I'm sure of, right? Like, I don't think the final end state of presentation online is going to be your LinkedIn photo with your suit and tie on, right? Like, I mean, why would that be the case? We've had usernames even from the bulletin board years, right? And when we had bulletin boards in the 1990s, it's not like the normal naming model in a bulletin board was your full name and social security number, right? It might be, Doom Fighter 96 or something, right? And so I think it's a pretty normal thing to do, to be honest. And I think everyone's going to have an avatar at a first approximation in a decade. And a lot of people will have some level of pseudonymity, and they might have multiple ways they'd like to present themselves. And I think this happens anyway, right? Like the way you present yourself on LinkedIn is likely different than the way most people present themselves on TikTok or WhatsApp or on Twitter, right? And so this is just a small extension to that same theory.
So, as I mentioned in the introduction, one of the things you have been working on is the open metaverse. Could you explain to people that don't know where the open metaverse is right now and where you think it could be a year from now in the end of 2023?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think it's important to take a step back and say, why does any of this matter in the first place, right? And if we think about the history of the web, I do believe the Web 1, Web 2, Web 3 framework is basically accurate. Web 1 was made with public interoperable protocols, SMTP, HTML, and so on. And these protocols are free for anyone to use and for anyone to build applications on. So Gmail can build an email server, and Outlook can build an email service, and I can run an email server at home by myself. And this is what an internet standard should be. In the Web 2 era, the standards got captured by centralized services. And so if you think about Twitter is arguably the short messaging protocol, but captured as a company. And because it got captured as a company, you get into these very weird discussions of it somehow is very important who the CEO of Twitter is. And based on who the CEO of Twitter is, someone may or may not be able to use the short messaging protocol in some way or another. This to me is strange, right? Like you wouldn't from scratch architect the internet and say, we have this way to communicate and it's a global social communication mechanism, short messaging, and we're going to decide who of all 8 billion people can use it and with what visibility And the person who's going to make that decision is whoever the CEO of Twitter is from time to time. It's weird, right? And here we have an opportunity to go back to the original principles of the web in terms of how we architect the next step. And a simple way to think about it is that NFTs will be the ownership layer, and people will have specific applications, right? So if I own 6529, and that's in my Ethereum wallet, and it's self-sovereign, and maybe Facebook will make a wonderful application that you can interact with via NFTs. I'm all for it. Maybe someone else will make a Metaverse application. That's great. Maybe someone will make a game, a social media network. Maybe someone will give you special benefits at a bar in New York. All of these open application development and innovation can happen if, and only if, there is a separation of the ownership layer and the application layer. So in this context, what are we trying to do at is trying to develop the following concept, which is a Metaverse space platform protocol, I don't know what you want to call it, where it has the same censorship resistance of, say, Bitcoin. And this is a very hard standard to meet, right? If you think about a lot of NFT-oriented metaverses, they use NFTs for the ownership of the land, let's say. And that's good. It's a step forward, right? It's better than if they didn't. But the presentation layer they're rendering is often centralized. And so in many of these worlds, they're running Unreal Engine or Unity because it makes it much easier to do it that way. And someone's specifically running it on their servers. And if it's given that they're running it, there's often, if you read the terms of service, they can ask you to exit the game or the metaverse, even if you own the NFT, right? What we're trying to do is something more abstract. And so I'll tell you where we are now and where we'll be in a year to answer this question. Where we are now is experimenting on the user experience. It's improving. We have some hopefully pretty big performance improvements coming in the next few months. It is not fully decentralized yet. It's not fully open yet, which is why I still say we're experimenting. We have not launched fully into production. We've had a great response from artists. I think there's now 3,000 artists who have their galleries in the space, which is a huge number. And so I don't know if there's any place on the web with more intensive amount of art in one place as home right now. And where I'd love to be in 365 days is to be able to tell you, we've improved the user experience, it's easier to use, it works better on more devices, so that's important practically. But also, we have end-to-end strong commitments to permissionlessness. So what do I mean by that? Renders in the browser, so the client's the browser. Renders off a GLB file, which is an open source three-dimensional file that will be able to be stored anywhere. But the positioning in the world today is off-chain. That needs to come on-chain. So you can say, I am controlling my space. I'm Molly, I have my space, and I'm sovereign over that space. And maybe you'll take one approach and I'll take a different approach, and that's fine. We'll be in parallel with each other. We won't have a counterparty relationship. We'll just be in parallel on chain with each other. So that's what we're trying to get to.
And so my next question then has to go back to one of your tweets, because you're pretty big on Twitter. And so I'm going to reference your tweets, a lot. You wrote in a thread semi-recently that money is just a game. So in your opinion, then, what system should we be playing to play it successfully?
Yeah, so this is a hard one to do quickly and not get misinterpreted. Obviously, for the vast majority of people, money does not feel in any way like a game, right? That it's a gigantic stressor in their lives, and That was true for me in long, big chunks of my life as well. I think the mental model here is the following. The way a capitalist society works, which is what most of us live in, is that ultimately how much money you make has something to do with, are you meeting some needs of your fellow co-citizens, right? And that's how market economies work. And there's all types of breakdowns in market economies, but the general theory of how a market economy works is true in many parts of a market economy. In which case, what you're trying to solve for, either at an individual level or at a business level, organizational level, is what is it that you can provide that people want that other people can't easily provide, right? And a lot of people, I think, very reasonably get anxious when their economic life is not going the way they want it to, right? And that might not be a productive way for solving this puzzle. Whereas if you say, I'm trying to solve this puzzle, I'm trying to play a game. In order to be successful at this game, I need to solve this puzzle, and this puzzle is, on an individual level. Let's say, a very simple hack that I tell people is, in almost any field that you're in, it doesn't mean you're a software developer, almost any field that you're in, if you add plus understanding of how crypto assets work, you'll make more money. You're a bookkeeper, but you know how to read Etherscan, you'll make more money. Why? A lot of people want crypto native bookkeepers, and very few bookkeepers today know how to read Etherscan, right? And this doesn't mean you're a software developer, it doesn't mean you know Solidity, it doesn't mean you're an artist. But thinking through this framework, that you have to provide something that not that many other people provide, I think it's useful. And I think for most people, they'll more productively over years, it's not a week or a day or a month, over years solve this problem if they try and abstract out and look at it in air quotes as a game.
So those are definitely some very good points. I also think that if you think of things as a game, it makes it easier to take things less seriously, potentially. And so you can have more clear decisions. But anyway, this is about you and not.
No, I agree completely. That's sort of what I mean, right? Like that you're trying to solve a puzzle as opposed to thinking like, oh, the system's not helpful to me, or nobody wants me, or I'm not being valued. The system's unemotional for the most part, right? And so you just have to, you'll go further if you can view it as a puzzle you're trying to solve, or as a game in this case, if you think of it that way.
Well, I hope everyone listening writes this down. We have some New Year's resolution time coming up. You can think of ways to be a bit more positive. Let's see. Next, I wanted to ask you a little bit about future predictions. You've talked a lot about the metaverse, NFTs, everything. What do you think in the future will come first in terms of really entering the mainstream for everyday people? Would you pick cryptocurrency or would you pick AI, artificial intelligence?
Oh, this is super. I think they're going to work together. So I think, and this is not in the next couple of years, but if you assume, and I think it is fair to assume, that 5 years plus out, we're going to have a lot of interesting narrow AIs doing things. I'm not even talking about artificial general intelligence. If we get that, all bets are off. What I do think we will have is an AI that's very good at, we saw this a little bit with ChatGPT, writing essays or solving a certain type of scientific problem or trading cryptocurrencies or whatever, playing chess. It doesn't matter, right? Writing jokes, making art. You'll have lots of narrow AIs. And those AIs are going to operate at machine speed, not human speed. Right? We will not be able to keep up. I was goofing around with ChatGPT, and it can just crank out essay after essay after essay on a particular topic. And the only thing slowing it down is how quickly I can type my responses, right? If you took me out of the loop, it would fly. Well, once you have more and more capable AIs that can do this, they're ultimately going to interact with each other to do stuff. And when they interact with each other, it is very likely that they'll have to exchange value. And when they have to exchange value, well, how are they going to do that? Is it likely that they're going to do that by pulling out their Amex and swiping their Amex with each other? Well, no, of course not. These are pieces of software running on the internet. Well, we've solved how pieces of software running on the internet can generically exchange value with each other. And that's to embed a cryptocurrency wallet. And so my mental model of how is that ultimately crypto assets, cryptocurrencies, are going to be the economic architecture or infrastructure for the machine learning economy. Right? So these things are going to go together. The effect to a human might be that you don't separate the two, right? Like if someone says, oh, this is a great restaurant, well, the restaurant also has banking in order to be successful, right? And collects money and it pays its employees and what have you. You care because you're eating your sushi, right? Well, these AIs are going to do things. And in order to do things, they're going to need resources and revenue. And they're going to work with each other through crypto assets. And if that's the case, the human will just see a unified product, service offering, etc. But what's working in the back end is a combination of AI and crypto assets.
So I definitely have spent my fair share of hours playing around with ChatGPT. And so I don't know. For me, the question is a little bit biased if I was to turn it on myself, because crypto already is an everyday part of my life. So AI is going to have to naturally take a back seat. Let's see what else. We have probably time for like 2 or 3 more questions. With everything that's happened in crypto over the last few months, maybe you could break down a little bit of what you think crypto as a movement is doing really well right now and where you think the movement itself should be improving upon.
I think you're not going to be surprised to hear this, but I do think the most interesting area of crypto, the most innovative area of crypto right now is in NFTs. I think NFTs will be crypto's consumer moment. It's very interesting. Someone says, oh, what about zero-knowledge proofs? Yeah, zero-knowledge proofs are amazing. They're great technology. But where we're actually seeing a very fast iteration of end-user usage cases of on-chain assets is in NFTs. For all of the great talk about decentralization we've done the last decade, most fungible tokens, the most common activity is trading them on an exchange, which, it's something, but it's not a very interesting thing to me. Whereas where people are experimenting on how they can use on-chain permissionless assets to do things and to do things with people, all that innovation right now is happening in the NFT space. So that is probably not a huge surprise coming from me, but it's what I believe. The area we have to do better is, I believe, the crypto field in general has been utterly terrible at communicating why society should be in favor. Okay? It's certainly not, the communication message is certainly not something like, have fun staying poor if you don't buy Bitcoin or something, right? This is a terrible message. Nobody's going to like that, right? And the logical thing someone's going to think is like, well, if that's the way, we'll shut you guys down. Right? Why would anyone like that? What you have to think through is, why is it beneficial for society to have permissionless platforms? And I have found that a broader set of people resonate with an NFT-based message on this than with some fungible token. So for example, if I tell someone, today you own a painting on your wall, right? It's non-custodial. It's in your house. You own it. You can do whatever you want with it. You can sell it. You can burn it. You can lose it. You can forget to insure it and it gets destroyed in a flood. Okay. Would it be strange if someone said, no, you're not allowed to do this, you have to hold your painting at, JP Morgan Chase, and then they'll let you look at it on occasion. But no, it's normal that you have private property in a Western democracy. Well, imagine you have that painting online. What we're saying is you should be able to own that painting, not that JP Morgan or Facebook or Apple hold it for you, then you can own it yourself. And yes, if you own it, you might lose it or lose your keys or send it to the wrong person. These things happen. They happen in the physical world too. But we have a general model that grown adults in the Western world can own private property and take the personal responsibility for that. And if you imagine that our world will become progressively digital and we'll have more and more digital objects, the question society should ask themselves is the following. This is the single most important question we have right now to ask ourselves. Who should be the owner of our private property in an increased digital world? We, the people, or Facebook, Google, Twitter, Apple, Epic Games? No problem with any of these companies. They're great companies that do a lot of good work. But anyone who says NFT is not the answer, by definition, is practically saying one of these big companies is the answer. And when you frame it that way, it's a very different discussion than I hear typically happening in Brussels and in Washington, right? The discussion of should we promote, I had an opportunity to speak with policymakers in the EU a few weeks ago. This isn't even like a hard decision. It's not you should be fighting crypto. You should be actively promoting it because there will be a large European economy digitally. And if you have two choices, that economy is controlled and managed by one large American tech company or two or three, or by the European citizens, why shouldn't it be the latter, right? And this is the discussion that needs to happen, that the digital world is important. It's real, that your constitutional rights, your typical things you believe you should have in a Western democracy, you can own things, and that you're presumed allowed to own things. And if you commit a crime, of course, then someone should take you to court and you should lose them, right? If you've stolen them from somewhere, of course. But that's how it works in the normal world as well, right? In the pre-digital world. And that we need to transport the general principles of Western democracy into a digital world. And that is not consistent with saying, oh, you can do whatever you want online as long as it's under some third party's control. We don't operate that way in the physical world. It would be a step back to like a feudal area, right? The last time I remember Europe operating that way, or the United States, was in feudal times. Oh, you can't own the land, you're going to work on someone else's land and they decide, right? And then we said, oh no, it's actually a positive step forward in human freedom for people to be able to own things. And to me, this is the important thing. Instead, the messaging tends to be, I think, purely or largely financially oriented. And then it also gets mixed up with a lot of centralized entities in the crypto space, right? Exchanges, etc. Some of them are good actors, some of them are bad actors, but their needs are something different, right? Their needs are not these needs in either case, right? They have to find some type of resolution with the regulatory state on how they're going to be regulated. And they should be regulated. They're centralized entities, right? The general message should be citizens should be allowed to own things and take responsibility for own things. And sure, if someone is a centralized entity operating in the crypto sphere, they should have a supervisory regime, not hugely dissimilar from a centralized entity operating in the fiat sphere. Why should that be different? And that's not crypto's battle, right? That's the exchange's battle. That's the battle of the centralized, of the CeFi providers. Crypto's battle should be something along the dimension of human rights, constitutional rights, generally that the state has to, as its base case, trust its citizens, right? And humanity fought for thousands of years to get to that state. It was not the default state of humanity. And my major concern why 6529 exists is there's a slippage of hard-won freedoms that exist in the physical world when we go to the digital world. And that's what we should be focused on.
Again, a lot of things to learn from that. We have time for one more question. This is one that was proposed by one of the CMC team I thought was interesting. If you could pick any one of your memories to encode as an NFT, what would you pick?
Huh. I think, and I don't know how, this is a very interesting question. I don't know how it would happen, but let's take that for granted. When I was a kid, for my teenage years, I think my happy place was deep out in the ocean and the sea, where you just, and it's probably still my happy place, I just have much less time to do it than when I could spend all summer doing it, right? When I was 18, I could do this all summer. Now I get to do it on rare occasions. But that feeling of being at one with the ocean, good way out from land, and just surrounded by blue is a very happy memory for me. It's a very happy feeling for me. And I'd love to be able to share that with other people through an NFT.
It's a beautiful answer. So we're about out of time. Is there anything else you wanted to say to sort of the CMC public that's here? Any holiday messages, anything else about the metaverse you wanted to let them know?
I would just say two things. Keep focus on learning. There's no better way to be more successful in this sphere by continuing to develop your skills, educate yourself, learn new skills, try things. Try not to get too caught up in the financial aspects. If you learn and develop your skills, your financial outcomes will end up being fine on the whole, right? Whereas if you go the other way around, you might end up, not having good financial outcomes and not learning anything, not developing as a person, right? There's almost infinite opportunity in this field, and the best things most people can do is invest in themselves, as opposed to hoping, token X is going to do the job for them and invest in themselves. Eventually, the other stuff will come along. And then beyond that, well, I want to wish everyone a great holiday season and New Year.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And what a fun way to end our holiday live stream. It's been 2 hours of nonstop content. And yeah, happy holidays. And Punk 6529, I hope to see you again, maybe in the metaverse, maybe somewhere.
I will be there.
Cool.
We'll be there. I hope to see you there too.
Great. Happy holidays to everyone watching.